If you are a video content creator and you don't want to waste your money on additional gear, especially by purchasing new expensive lenses that may ruin your budget, then this episode is definitely for you. Hi everyone, my name is Pavel Supanenko and today I'm gonna tell you how to squeeze the maximum from the lens you already own. First of all guys, if you are new here on this channel and you are interested in filmmaking, cinematic stuff, hit this like and subscribe buttons together with the bell icon to not miss my new videos. That'll be just awesome, thank you! Okay, back to the topic. So let's say you've just purchased a DSLR or mirrorless camera together with its kit lens or something better for a reasonable price. So you have the only one lens, which is most probably a zoom lens, with an average aperture value around 4, which is nothing special, just a standard lens which is suitable for most of the shots. And the next step, which most of the people do, is starting looking for an additional prime lens, something like 24mm or 85mm, which is a little bit faster, brighter, with this crazy bokeh in the background, thanks to the low aperture value. And this is the moment when you need to say to yourself, wait, do I really need it? What is the percentage of my shots that I'll use this crazy bokeh for? If your answer is, I don't give a damn, I just love buying new stuff, then fine. But if you have a limited budget, but you still want to have a great image with a similar to prime lenses bokeh effect, but using the lens you already own, here is the moment where I share my tricks and tips. Generally speaking, everything I'll be talking about today is doable with almost any zoom lens plus camera combination. However, I'll be focusing obviously on the gear I own. So the main characters of today's episode are Sony a7 III camera and Sony Zeiss 16-35mm f4 autofocus lens. And here's my first tip for the video creators who haven't yet started but are just in the process of searching for a zoom lens. Try to look for the lenses with a fixed aperture value, something like f4 or f2.8 if you have a bigger pocket. Avoid lenses with a variable aperture value, like f3.5 to 5.6. The reason is simple: whenever you're shooting a video and then zooming into the object, it's getting darker due to the higher value of aperture for the longer focal length. And this is definitely something you don't want to happen while shooting your video. If you already own such a lens, the only workaround to keep the brightness of your video fixed is to not use the focal zoom function during shooting. Use your legs, just come closer to the object and your brightness will remain the same. If you are too lazy to walk closer to the object, use a digital zoom. And that relates to my second tip, which is in-body zoom modes. Guys, really, don't be afraid of using zoom. I know that in our minds, digital zoom, this is something coming from ancient times when after zooming into the object, you could see literally every pixel of the enlarged image, but nowadays it works way better and zoom processing uses even different technology, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So what would I normally do if I was about, for example, to shoot something that is located far from me? I would take my camera, which most probably would have a 16-35mm lens on it. I would make sure the object was still far from my 35mm, which is maximum for my lens, and afterward I would put the lens with a longer focal length, or would just come closer. That would happen to me like 2 years ago, but thanks to technology that many cameras offer today, now while shooting in 4K, I may just switch, for example, to a Super 35 mode which has 1.5 crop factor, and voila! I have an imitation of a more narrow lens by pushing a single button. Many of you are thinking now, wait, cropping your 4K video by 1.5 will decrease the quality of an image, as I will not use the entire sensor for it, right? Genius Sony engineers came up with a brilliant idea to make the following trick. When you normally shoot a 4K video without cropping anything, Sony a7 III camera uses the entire 6K sensor and then processing and downsampling the image to 4K. However, when you shoot in Super 35 mode, the camera uses just 4K part of the sensor. So the outcome is always the same, 4K video. Isn't that genius? I know that downsampling from 6K to 4K and native 4K are different ways of obtaining the same effect, but I was comparing many times the quality of my video to see if there is any difference between when I shoot in a regular mode and then zoom in post, or when I'm shooting straight away in Super 35 mode. And to be honest, I don't see any difference at all. Do you see any? So from that moment, I use Super 35 mode almost all the time whenever I need to have an object closer, and all this is possible again without changing the lens. Talking about zoom, I should also mention another zoom option which Sony a7 III camera is offering. It's a clear image zoom with additional 1.5 crop factor. It will give you exactly the same result as Super 35 mode, however using different technology. Sony calls it Pixel Super Resolution technology. Anyway, it's hard to see a difference between a video cropped by Super 35 mode or by this clear image zoom, so you can easily use both. Things are getting more interesting when you use clear image zoom on top of Super 35 mode. Then your lens, which is set to 35mm for example, suddenly is capable of shooting as an almost 79mm lens. And here you can see a side-by-side comparison of how far we've already got with this. Pretty impressive, right? And still your image looks pretty nice and sharp. But what if I tell you we're not done with zoom yet? Third way to zoom in or use on top of the ones I mentioned before is a digital zoom. It gives additional 2.5 crop factor, extending your 16 to 35mm lens to an insane 210mm lens. And that's how it looks in practice. So here is our usual 4K video. Now I'm going to menu, switching my zoom mode to a digital zoom mode. It's located in the second tab on page 5 in the menu. Then, going back to my live view mode, I press the button I've assigned before for a zoom function, and here we have our 4 crop factor zoom. After reaching a value of 1.5, the camera is automatically switching from clear image zoom to a digital zoom. You see how letter C is changing to a D, allowing us to go up to a value of 4. Now let's make it even closer and use our Super 35 mode. Boom! That is so sick! You can see it here, how close now there is an object that seemed to be far away just seconds ago. And again, we didn't use any other lens, we use what we have. The same trick you can use in your macro videos. And that's what my third tip will be about. Fortunately, most zoom lenses have pretty close sharpness distance. My Sony Zeiss lens has it around 28 centimeters or 11 inches, so playing around with these insane zoom options that you have, you may obtain great macro videos of small objects located pretty close to your lens. Let's have an example. This tiny little Barbie is located about 30 centimeters from my camera sensor. The focal length of the lens is set to 16mm right now. After zooming in optically to the maximum of what this lens is offering, here you can see the object that cannot be closer to the camera while staying in focus. However, let's zoom in with an additional Super 35 crop mode. Here is what we have now. Okay. Let's go even farther and make it more than 2 times closer using a clear image zoom. Boom! Wanna have it 6 times closer? Let's get crazy and use a digital zoom. Bam! Insane close-up. Of course, don't expect exceptional sharpness from such zoom, but you may always add some sharpness effect in post. If you don't want to play with sharpness, go with just clear image zoom and Super 35 mode without adding a digital zoom. It's still a huge difference compared to what lens is offering without using any zoom tricks. So as you can see, macro video shots with a regular zoom lens are more than possible. However, remember that it's always a combination of lens and camera that makes your lens work the way you want, not just pure lens. That's why you need to take into account all pieces of a puzzle. And we're getting to my fourth tip of how to squeeze the maximum from your lens. Let's talk about shallow depth of field, which is one of the key factors of why you decide to buy a prime lens on top of the zoom one. The main trick of crazy bokeh in the background is an aperture value. And the smaller the number is next to the f on the lens, the more light it lets to get into your camera, and the more blur background you'll be able to obtain. With a lens like mine, which has a minimum aperture value of just 4, blur effect is not so crazy compared to the lenses with f1.4 or f1.8. However, we still may use some tricks in order to fake a good prime lens. Important thing to mention, we cannot do magic in dark conditions, so we'll have to crank up an ISO a little bit in order to compensate for lack of light. I don't know how other cameras, but Sony a7 III has an extremely good sensor for low light conditions. So sometimes I was shooting during the night and increasing my ISO to 6400 or even more, and still I was getting a decent image without a noise. Another thing, shallow depth of field. And here is a very simple rule. The closer you are to the object, the more bokeh you'll have in the background. Here is a comparison. My 16 to 35mm lens set to 24mm is now located way far from the ball, so it's blending with the background. The same thing you'll actually notice even using a fast prime lens like mine 24mm f1.5 Samyang. But when I move the ball closer, you'll see how different bokeh looks like. Crazy and beautiful with a prime lens and average with an f4 zoom lens. But let's do a trick. We'll increase our focal length on our zoom lens from 24mm to 35mm, and we'll make a few steps back. Not satisfying? Alright, let's make a few steps back again and turn our Super 35 mode on, which will transform our lens to a 52.5mm lens. So what we're trying to do by that is imitate a telephoto lens. Now we're talking. So a simple trick with a distance and slightly different focal length may give you a comparable bokeh. I know it's not the same as the farther you are, the wider your face will look on the screen, for example, but something for something, and I think this trick is worth the effect, especially when you don't have time to change the lens or money to buy the new one. Just step back, zoom in, and you have much better bokeh. Alright guys, I've just shared 4 tips on how to rock with just one lens without needing to buy a prime or telephoto lens. That was more useful for Sony a7 III users, however a lot of stuff I was talking in this video works with any other camera. And hopefully you'll learn something from this video. It was my longest one so far, so if you are still here watching this, you are the best. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't done that yet. So, see you soon. Cheers!